what is expected and what should be done to mitigate these challenges. Topic today, road to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Beyond COP26, road to 1.5 C rise requires behavior change. So that's the topic. And 1.5 degrees centigrade from the industrial pre-industrial temperatures, which was in 1850. So that was the base. So currently we are at 1.1 degree, and the challenge is to have not cross 1.5 degree because it has consequences. Our speaker, Mr. Nazoor Baig, he has his career in power industry. He had been vice president of DT Energy for a number of years. Mainly, he worked in America, lately in Pakistan as well. Currently, he's based in America, but visiting Pakistan. So he's going to touch upon all of the subjects. What is the issue? How did we get here? What are the contributing factors? What are the contributing fuel, technologies, etc.? Now, what we are going to do here, because of the limited time that we have and the vast subject, we have 45 minutes for the speaker, and then 15 minutes for the questions and answers in the end. Farooq Ali Khan, who is the Pakistan South Chair, he will be moderating the questions in the end. So if you have any questions, just do post your questions in the chat box or send it out to Farooq Ali Khan. So over to you. Please welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. You want me to get started?
Yes, please.
All right. I'm going to turn my camera off just to save the bandwidth here, and then turn it back. So, but everybody can see the screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Uneeb, you did a great job. I think you can continue on with this presentation and deliver it. So absolutely no issue. All right. As Dr. Uneeb mentioned, the topic here is to talk about road to 1.5 degrees C, which requires a behavior change. So what I am going to present to you is share information, okay, which is really the first level of learning, first level of communication is, sharing information. I got interested in looking at this to understand what global warming is all about and what the implications are, especially from the power sector. So I'm going to heavily focus in that arena, but it has implications as you'll see as we go forward. My intent is to make you aware of the situation as it relates to global warming and climate change. The information that I'm about to share is from many resources, okay? And I'm sharing this with you with the hope that you all can go and do your own research and make yourself aware and learn as to what's going on. One of the sources is IPCC. This is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They have been doing some studies, modeling, and so on what is happening to the climate based on greenhouse gases and the resulting temperature rise, global temperature rise. So I'll talk a little bit about that. IEA, International Energy Agency, they have published the World Energy Outlook 2021. They do this every year, but 2021, they did that ahead of COP26 for the leaders of the world to review and make changes. Third is EIA, which is Energy Information Agency. They produce annual energy outlook around the world, and they're US based. And the last one that I want to mention is OWID, which is Our World in Data. Okay, they have a lot of good information, and a lot of graphs that I will show you are from their website. And all of these agencies have provided all these reports for free. So please look at these things for learning purposes. Okay, moving on, and somehow, why is it frozen? Ooh. Ah, there you go. I am not able to change. Why? There we go. Okay. What I'm going to cover is what is the issue? What are the causes? How did we get here? What are we doing about it? How to get to net zero emissions by 2050? And I'll explain to you why. Why is that a year? Impact of net zero emission scenarios. We'll talk about scenarios. What is China's and India's plan, reaction and plan, and potential impacts and opportunities for Pakistan. So this is what I'm going to get into. But before I get into this, okay, because I want to deliver a message to you all, and be very clear as to what the message is. So I'm going to tell you what the message is up front, then I'm going to go into the details. There are 5 things. 1, Earth's average temperatures are rising due to greenhouse gases. Number 2, if we'll continue doing what we are doing, it could lead to major catastrophic events, weather events, like floods, fires, and so on. Sea level rises, we'll get into that a little more. Third, we need to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees C. Fourth, to do that, we have to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which, by the way, translates into a budget of 500 gigatons of CO2. That's all that's left, and it's not much, but we'll talk about that. 5, with everything said, it means changing how we live. There are options. The option is we continue to do what we are doing and deal with catastrophic events, or we can change the way we live, what energy we use for the future of the planet and all living things. So keep that in mind, okay? That's the bottom line message. The websites that I told you about, please go there and do your own research as well to have a better understanding. Okay, now let me get into what is the issue. As I mentioned, the Earth's average temperature is rising at an alarming rate. Now, due to greenhouse gases, which would result in major catastrophic events. And I'm not going to read all of those, but I think enough has been said on that. What these events could lead to is climate migrants, especially in islands that are at lower sea levels. They will be underwater. There will be water shortages. There could be drought conditions and so on, a lot of different things. There are studies that have been done that basically suggest that it could be 250 million people will have to relocate within the country or some other place. So it's pretty serious. The average temperature now is 1.1 degrees higher than the pre-industrial time, 1850s, like Dr. O'Neill has mentioned, and mainly due to burning of fossil fuels. And by the way, fossil fuels is coal, oil, and gas. If we continue this trend, the temperatures could reach 2.6 by the end of the century, 2.6 degrees by the end of the century. Based on the modeling and the data that the scientists have, they have made it clear that we must not exceed 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. To achieve this goal, we have to reduce carbon dioxide and methane to net zero by 2050. And there's a reason why you have to do that. And to do that, you have to take action starting now with certain goals by 2030. So I'm going to show you a graph. This graph basically tells you monthly temperature anomalies. A temperature anomaly typically is the difference from the average or the baseline. Okay, so absolute temperatures really don't mean a whole lot when they're looking at global warming or climate changes. So the baseline is typically for 30 years or more. So what is being looked at is, if you look at, I can get a laser pointer, if you can look at from the 1800s, from this time frame to the industrial, which is the baseline, to now where we are, that is the 1.1 degree temperature rise that is being talked about. So out of the 1.5, 1.1 is already behind us. So this is a pretty serious issue. So what I've just told you, I'm going to repeat very quickly. Average temperatures are rising. 1.1 degree is already consumed. 1.5 by 2100 is what we're shooting for. And net zero emissions of carbon dioxide and methane by 2050. That's what we need to achieve. Now, what are the causes? Already mentioned greenhouse gases. So let's look at, and due to burning of fossil fuels. If you look at the greenhouse gas contributions, carbon dioxide, 65%, fossil fuel and in industry processes, methane is 16%. Then if you go down at the bottom there, it says carbon dioxide again, which is 11% because of land use and deforestation, okay? If you look at economic sector, where we're getting the maximum emission, energy, which is electricity, heat, and transportation, 73.2%. And agriculture, forestry is 18.4%. So this is where what's causing a lot of the greenhouse gases. This graph shows a pretty good picture of the emissions of the greenhouse gases, specifically when we talk about CO2. Energy, the biggest block, okay? Energy use in industry, as you come out from the center to the outer circle, you have transportation, you have energy use in buildings and so on. So what I'm going to focus on, what I have focused on in my study or research that I'm trying to do, is basically on power, but I will talk a little bit about transportation and buildings because that has a direct impact on everybody. When you talk about power industry, it has, companies would have to look at it, but eventually that translates into people as well. So that's why this thing is very important. Since 65% of the greenhouse gases are CO2, and 73 is from the energy sector. I wanted to go and look at what are they talking about fossil fuels, because I've burned them all my life and been the polluter like anybody else. So I wanted to know what's going on. So the source of this data, is EIA.gov. Pounds of CO2 emitted per million BTU. If you look at the top four, they're all coal. They're different types of coal, anthracite, bituminous, and so on. Then you have diesel and heating oil. Then you have gasoline, and then you have propane, and then finally natural gas. Natural gas is 50% cleaner, okay, than the CO2. But if you read through all of it, to control the temperature, you have to almost get rid of all the fossil fuels, even natural gas. So, but you'll also hear me say, and a lot of the countries that are doing this, they're looking at natural gas as a transition fuel to shut coal down, maybe go switch to natural gas, gives you a little bit of time and you reduce your emissions. So that's kind of the thinking, because that starts to impact the market. We'll come to that later. In 1950, the world had emitted 6 billion tons per year of CO2. By 1990, it was 22 billion. Now it's about 35 billion tons a year. This graph basically shows you what the issue really is, okay? Looking at, since the 1950s, fossil fuel burning has just skyrocketed. It's just, the trajectory is straight up, okay? This is what's alarming. The dip that you see at the end of the curve, which is right about here, this is because of the pandemic, okay? Everything was shut down, travel was down, industries were down, and so on. So you did see it, but then in 2021, it jumped right back up to about 35. So it shows that we are actually influencing what's going on. Before COP26, Conference of Parties, IEA had produced this report, WEO 2021, which had different scenarios, stated policies, and announced pledges. And I will get into that here in the next few slides. And also what it takes to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Now, some of the carbon dioxide and methane is normally absorbed naturally in the environment, okay, about 50%. A large amount still remains in the atmosphere in case of methane for 10 years or so, a decade or so. CO2 for centuries, hundreds of years. So it doesn't really dissipate completely. For this reason, there is a sense of urgency that we should be stopping the emissions of greenhouse gases so that we can bend the curve. Let me go to the next slide. These are the different scenarios of emissions. So modeling shows everything from here back, that's the actual. Going forward, this is all based on model. Net zero emissions down to 0 by 2050 is what's desired. Okay, this is where we need to get to achieve 1.5 degrees. The next graph will show, have a corresponding temperature chart. Steps is what the countries have policies in place. This is where we are. Announced pledges is the new pledges that the government's made before the COP26. And SDS is the same as net zero, but what it talks about is making sure universal energy access to a lot of people. There are about a billion people in the world who have no electricity. There are about 3 billion people who don't have the right fuels to do the cooking. So to get everybody to that level and the increase in population, world population, you do that comes you to the SDS. That's basically what's my understanding of this curve. Same model, same scenarios, if you look at it. By the way, their model is, output is MAGIC, Model for Assessment of Greenhouse Gases Induced Climate Change. This is the model that they use. In steps, if we continue on the same way, we would achieve 2.6 degrees Celsius. Just want to point out the projections that were done in 2015 at the time of Paris meeting, the projections were 3.5. Okay, so if everything is done, you could achieve under the step scenario 2.6. Announced pledges, okay, takes you down to 2.1. Net zero emissions is the only one that takes you below the 1.5 that is required. So, what I basically said in these few slides, okay, I'm kind of recapping a few slides here. CO2 emissions, methanes, we got to reduce. We got to take it down to zero, net zero. Energy sector is what we're going to focus on. Coal, oil, and gas are fossil fuels. And CO2 and methane remain in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. So if you change it now, doesn't mean you'll see a reaction. You will see a reaction a few decades down. So that's why it's important to take care of things now. All right, how did we get here? Since 1751, the world has emitted over 1.5 trillion tons of CO2. Now I mentioned the budget that's remaining for 1.5 is 500 gigatons, which is nothing, really. And by the way, that's 500 tons that they have calculated. I didn't put that chart here, but that's with a 50% probability of achieving 1.5 degrees. If you want an 80% probability of success, then you have to have, if I remember correctly, close to 300 gigatons. So all of this analysis and modeling has been done, and these reports have a lot of this information. Okay, based on the data from OWID, North America, Europe, and China are responsible for 50% of the emissions to date. Okay, cumulative. So when I say to date, this data that I picked up was until 2017. 1997, at the time of Kyoto Treaty, 24.3 billion tons per year was being emitted. Paris, we were up to 35. Now we're at 36 in 2019, we're 36.7 billion tons. Though we have put renewables and doing a lot of that work, it's still not enough to change the trajectory of the curve that I had shown you all before. At the bottom, I put down Pakistan's number. By the way, if you go to OWID, all of this information is there. You can select which country and so on. It'll give you all of this data. Okay. Pictorially, if you look at it, cumulative, North America, 29% of the global emissions, US about 25% of that. EU was the second largest, 22. China was not as large, as when you look at the total emitted so far, and neither is India and Brazil, but all of these three countries are coming up pretty fast. If you look at 2017 by itself, okay, 53% is from Asia, just that 1 year. But it is also home to 60% of the world's population. The majority of the growth that is anticipated in the next decade or 2 decades is in Asia, okay? So this is the region that's going to see majority of the growth. So in like India and China, they're growing pretty fast. So China emitted 27% of the total emissions. So that's there. US went down in 2020 to 4.7 from the highest of 6.13. So this is really a picture telling us who the large emitters are. Naturally, the developing economies are not the emitters as the large developed economies are. Okay, what are we doing about it? The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, as Dr. Nevet mentioned, was formed in 1994, okay, with the thinking that we need to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions to protect the Earth from overheating or the threat of climate change. Now, that was 1994. So the scientists, I am assuming, okay, knew about this probably in the 80s. They had been collecting data and so on. So that's the first time they had alarmed and they formed the group. First meeting was in Berlin in 1995, and when you look at Kyoto, at that time the agreement was to reduce 6 main greenhouse gases. And, you know, these are HFCs and PFCs and so on, but to a smaller quantity. The biggest culprit is carbon dioxide and methane. In Paris, the discussion was further to say we have to limit the global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees. And at the same time that we should be pursuing to increase the limit to 1.5. That was what was discussed, and that was in Paris. Fast forward, Glasgow, a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and some people felt they didn't meet the target. But if you go back and look at it, there was some progress made, but the real issue really has to do with will this be implemented? Will all the governments do what they're saying they're going to do? At the same time, will all the people in the world, like us, actually make this thing happen? So keeping all of that in mind, the key things that came out of it was this. When it comes to coal power, we need to shut it down and replace it with clean energy. Halting and reversing deforestation. Speed up the switch to electric vehicles. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion, okay? Electric vehicles charged with coal is not clean fuel, okay? It is coal that is getting burnt. So it really has to go with both. One is you got to go to renewable energy and go to electric vehicles. That would make sense. But, you know, switching to electric vehicles. A good number of the companies, automotives, General Motors, I've listed them, Jaguar, Audi, I know Chrysler and Ford in the US, they have basically said 2035 they're going to be producing 100% electric vehicles. So That is in our lifetime. That's only, that's about, what, 12 years away? So we will see these changes. Reducing emissions from methane, that is the other big piece that's there by 2030. So a lot of the 100 countries have committed to doing that. The other thing that came out was adaptation and loss damage. Okay, so boost the efforts to deal with the climate impacts. So when there is a loss, and there are developing countries, how do you help them out? Finance was the other area. This is about $130 trillion of private financing is going to be made available to achieve net zero targets, and the financing would be for basically developing and emerging economies. And I said that, but I think it's going to be for broader than just developing economies. The other one was collaboration. Okay, power breakthrough. Clean power for all countries by 2030. That is the big push. Road transportation, zero emission vehicles, make that a new normal. Get away from the petrol or gas engines and so on. Steel breakthrough is making near zero emission steel the preferred choice in global markets, okay? And I put it that way because that's really what I got from the report. You will see, I think we will see, where people will start to look at where things are produced, what was the carbon footprint, and should be a preferred choice or not. Do I buy this product or not? So a little bit of that is going to happen. Hydrogen breakthrough is making sure hydrogen is produced with low carbon fuels, renewables, maybe nuclear, and so on. By 2030, that's the push to get a lot of the hydrogen manufacturing from. Okay. What in those slides? I'm going to recap very quickly. COP, IEA, International Energy Agency, IPCC are trying to get the supports from the governments. They are not the decision makers. The governments are. The people in the countries are. So the more we get educated and we push the issue with our politicians, then things will happen, okay? These bodies are giving you some good information. This is like a doctor telling you, hey, quit eating all this red meat and quit having all this greasy food and all of this stuff. And it's your choice if you're going to do it or not, right? So if you don't do it, you're going to pay the consequences. So it's kind of the same way. This body is there to educate you, tell you, supported data, and now we got to push to make it happen. Greenhouse gases, and the potential of warming is there. There's plenty of data that's available. Countries have agreed to reduce and limit to 1.5 now. Okay, that is the push, not 2 degrees, less than 2 degrees, it's 1.5. That's where the 1.5 comes from. Okay, moving forward. I think I'm doing okay with time, so I'm going to get into how to get to net zero emissions by 2050. This is all from IEA report, okay? So they have outlined a path. They also say this is not the only path. So people will come up with better ideas, and if they do make sense, that people should apply. The goal is still, we got to reduce carbon dioxide and we got to reduce methane. Phasing out of coal from electric sector by 2030. This was a big push. Not all the countries agreed to it, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but majority of the countries have agreed to this. Okay, phasing out of coal, oil, and gas from electric sector is essential to reduction of carbon dioxide. Okay, to speed up to get to the question is how fast do we get there? That's really what I wanted to say. Electrification with clean and renewable energy is essential. So when we talk about electrification, we're talking a lot of things will be on electric. Okay, so that immediately gets my mind around our distribution systems healthy? At the homes, do we have the correct feeds? I don't know what's the amperage rating. So if I go to all electric, can I afford to do it? By the way, I just went to a 200 amp feed in my own house, okay, because I went to electric oven and so on and so forth. So there are things that impact at the individual's level, and there are things that the governments need to do and the companies need to do. I am sure a lot of the people who are listening, okay, you are the future. You are the future leadership. So I really want you all to understand what this is, and when you're making the decisions for the future, you make the right decisions. So, okay, so what I'm going to talk here a little bit about phasing out of coal, transportation, and buildings. When it relates to coal, there's 2,100 gigawatts of operating plants right now on coal, which is 1/3 of the world's electricity that's in 2020. We need to install 2,100 gigawatts of renewables. The plants that are in construction or in planning, it's easy to shut down or cancel the projects that are in planning. The ones that are in construction, you probably will finish, but you look to shut them down sooner. And we'll talk a little bit about what's in the models. The existing plant retrofits, you can go to carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. Co-fire, also co-fire with biomass or ammonia. So when we talk about CCUS, it makes sense for gas. Coal, it probably will not be economical. That is my opinion. Okay, that is not in the reports. I'm letting you know where I made my opinion. Okay, so it's clear. Early retirements of coal-fired power plants. Reactions of countries was not unanimous. Okay, so like I said, U.S., China, Australia, India had differing opinions on timing. Nobody said, no, bad idea, I'm going to continue to burn. It was based on timing. So I'll give you India's example, okay? India basically said, I am trying to provide electricity to most everybody in my country. And my game plan, I started already, and I am going to be at this point. So I really can't agree to 2050. I'll agree to 2070, but I'll try and do better. So my first thing I got to do is I got to provide for my people. So that's kind of what's going on. The net zero emissions to 2050 is a path that IEA had identified, but now the governments have to look at it, what's achievable, what they're willing to do. So that's what's going on. Okay, moving on, looking at some of the coal-fired power plants. The average age. If you look at the plants in Asia, other than Korea and Japan, they're relatively new. South Africa, Europe, United States, they're pretty old, okay? So shutting the older plants down would be relatively easy. Newer plant becomes a little more difficult because you got to have incentive, you got to have cheaper power from renewable before anybody would want to switch. But switching to renewable, there are things you need to do with the grid. Not everything is just going to happen automatically. So we'll talk a little bit about that. CO2 emissions, the way it's been calculated in the model, I'll tell you. APS announced pledges. These are announced mid-year last year. Not law. There is no path going forward that was laid and say, yep, I'm going to do this. So this is not a binding agreement. So, but what this slide is saying is this. The average coal-fired plant capacity is retiring at age 35. In the emerging and developing economies, obviously this has an impact on Pakistan. The advanced economies, they're already at 35, and they will probably retire 5 to 8 years. I'll tell you, the company that I used to work for and few other utilities in the US, they have already announced that 2035 they would have all of their coal-fired plants shut down. Okay, they've already announced it. So, so things are happening. Net zero emission in this scenario, the net zero emissions assumption is that these plants in the emerging economies will shut down at age 25. Instead of 35 in this scenario, 25 in this to achieve this, okay? And it talks about CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. My opinion is gas side, it probably will work, and there's work going on in this area. Coal would be a bit difficult, more expensive. All right, moving to a little bit on transportation. Transportation obviously has the greatest reliance on fossil fuels, petrol, and so on. One of the major reasons the demand growth is, emerging market developing economies, okay, EMDE. Many of them don't have the net zero pledges yet, okay? Eventually they'll get to it. But this slide shows the CO2 emissions by mode. So, transportation mode. Passenger, freight, aviation, and other. The biggest gap you see here is in the passenger. And the reason for the gap is slower electrification. You've got to have electricity, you've got to have charging stations and so on to be able to move through that. And that's going to take a little bit of time. Plus, you have to go to renewable energy before you can say, okay, this is a clean operating car. So that's a little bit of a delay there that has been identified. Bottom line here is this, that electric cars, there's 30% assumed by 2030 in APS, but 60% in net zero emissions by 2030. So this is for the net zero. That's a big gap that needs to get closed. Rail is the most electrified sector. If you guys have been to China or Japan or other parts of the world, they have electric trains. I mean, this is, to me, is mass transit at its best, electrified. So I think more and more countries should be looking at that. Aviation area and shipping, there's a lot of discussion even on the shipping side is looking at hydrogen or ammonia. And how can that be done? Or even transitioning from bunker oil to gas first, LNG, and so on. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of talks that are even on YouTube. So I'm telling you that you probably should go and look at some of this thing and listen to what people are saying. But looking at biojet kerosene and synthetic kerosene to make these changes. I'm going to skip this slide, is basically about, okay, let me just kind of go through this. Clean energy investment in transportation today is at 75 billion. In APS, if we apply that, which is announced pledges, it will be 380 billion. But if you're trying to get to net zero emissions, that $570 billion investment required by 2030, which is 8 years. That's a lot. Even if you have the desire to do it, the question comes up, do you have the magnitude and do you have all of the resources to do that? So there are going to be some difficulties getting there. Under the buildings, space heating, when I talk about space heating, that's a big gap there. Literally has to do with accelerating retrofits to improve efficiency, using more renewables in the building, universal access to clean cooking and by electricity by 2030, efficiency appliances, reducing your thermostat set points in the wintertime and raising it up in the summertime. So those are all of those things that need to happen. Okay, impact on how we see energy. I think I mentioned this earlier. Getting to net zero depends significantly on the choices made by people, the companies, and what regulations come into place. Hello? Sorry. So the behavior changes, particularly we're looking at is getting to electric vehicles versus ICE, which is internal combustion engines. So as long as you have renewable energy. Passenger aviation, we're talking about reducing business travel. Well, COVID taught us how to do that. And this meeting, doing it online, none of us traveled. So which is good, and really also changing fuel on the aviation side to reduce the emissions. Building area, already mentioned this, thermostat setting, and also making buildings more efficient. Industry, looking at not only what material you use, and also looking at reusing the buildings longer, not doing the demolition and rebuilding new ones all the time. Okay, this particular, it's very busy, but I think all of these slides are going to be available to people, I think. But anyhow, what this thing is showing us today, we're using a lot of the fossil fuels. Compared to net zero, you're going to reduce that quite a bit. Looking at biomass, bioenergy, renewables, and nuclear now versus what might be in the future. So really, the energy sources are going to change, but if you're going through the electrification of the world, how your appliances is going to change, your vehicles are going to change, and so on. So you got to start looking at things differently as to how our life will change. Here's another side. Okay, when we do that, what happens to the energy sources? Here, what we're talking about is, I'm going to jump straight to net zero emissions in 2050. I'm talking about, here we have solar PV, onshore wind, offshore wind, batteries, okay, electrolyzers, and fuel cells. And this is what region. So literally what we're saying is that the markets are going to look a lot different. If you look at in this scenario, net zero emissions, if you combine the market of wind, solar, batteries, and so on, that's $27 trillion. That's a lot of money. of which 60% is on batteries, okay? So the markets are going to change. And I'm going to leave it at that and go to the next slide. The value of international trade, energy trade, okay? Today, or in 2019, about $1.5 trillion are traded, of which 66% is on oil, 14% natural gas, critical minerals about 11%. I'm going to jump to 2050 in the net zero emissions. The value of the trade is going to go down to 0.9 trillion. Majority of it is going to be critical minerals. Hydrogen will play a bigger role. Oil comes down, natural gas, and coal. So this is a major shift of how the international energy trade is going to be working. This is pretty significant. Okay, if we get to the, if everybody signs up for the net zero. So now you can look at the government's looking at it and saying, okay, if I do that, what is going to happen to my revenues? So it'll be interesting to watch. All right. What is China's reaction or plan? Okay. There is a report specifically on China. There's already a report for India by IEA. They just now released one for Canada. So they're going through and doing a number of different countries as we go forward. So as they come out, if you sign up for the IEA, Twitter, or wherever, they'll send you a notice and then you can download it, okay? That's how I learned all of this. So China has two targets. Peak emissions by 2030, net zero by 2060. Okay, they said 2050 they could not do. China's challenge will be if you get to peak to 2030, can you drop it down to net zero by 2060? So there is some concerns it'll be difficult, okay? Because not only China, I think it's normal around the world. I don't want to give up anything that I already have. So that will play a big role. So if you're looking at China's energy sector, and I remember I told you I'm an energy guy, so I focus on energy. So coal peaked in 2013. They're saying they're going to decline to less than 10% by 2050. Oil to peak by 2025 because they're still building some refineries. Gas to peak by 2040. So, but it's much lower. I don't even want to guess. I think it's like less than 10% or 5% or something like that. But I don't know exactly. But it's going to go up quite a bit. So what this tells me is the big economy like China, and I'll show you India as well, if they're focusing on gas as a transition fuel, and they're still asking for oil, and India is asking for oil quite a bit for the next 2 decades, the markets are going to go crazy, okay? And we have, Pakistan has to play in that market. So what's going to happen to the prices? So that would be a concern. The rest of it you can see out here is they want electricity want to double by 2050 and more than 90% from non-fossil. So 7.2 terawatt hours, they want to go to 15 terawatt hours. India's plans takes them to 2070 versus 2050. India is the third largest energy consumer, and I think it's based on 5.5 percent GDP every year until 2040. They expect the energy demand to go up by 150%, with fuel imports tripling over the next 2 decades. So based on their growth plan, they see the energy demand going up 3% until 2030. So interesting to note here is the capacity as to how they're going to go up. Battery storage, they don't have any here, but they're going to have battery storage. but they need the flexibility to maintain the grid stability to avoid blackouts, especially when you go to renewable. India's, load and demand flexibility will require engineering, okay, understanding engineering. So they're looking at different mixes, renewable mix, time of day, you know, obviously that's there. Evening time, everybody's home, they turn the air conditioners on, so on and so forth, but there is no sun. Or what if the wind dies? So that's why reliance on battery and pump storage, so that's why they have that there. Grid integrated electric vehicles as a virtual power plant. All the cars are charged up. They charge, I think, about 60, I don't want to guess, but I think you use very little bit of the charge that you have on the car. So the whole thinking is you have virtual power plant there, you go home, you plug your battery in, you feed the grid. So this work is going on in a lot of different countries. Diesel generators as backup. India has about 70 to 80 gigawatts of this. Hydrogen could be another source. Then we get to looking at Pakistan. Okay, based on Pakistan's nationally determined contribution, NDC for COP26. This is available online. If you go and search, you can download and you can do all of the details that you want. Pakistan is targeting to shift to 60% renewable energy by 2030, which includes hydro, okay? Hydro. Targeting 30% on electric vehicles by 2030. Pakistan identified their target reduction of 50% on emissions by 2030. They're saying unconditionally 15% of their own resources provided, conditional 35% from the international grant, which amounts to 101 billion by 2030 and 65 billion by 2040. I think they do have a good plan. Okay, so, but there's work that needs to get done. The ban 2 coal plants, there is a shortage of 3,000 megawatts. Here's, you know, the breakdown of the power sector itself. You have a lot of capacity left to go to hydro. But at the same time, you do have a lot of solar potential, primarily in Balochistan. So both of these could play a major role as to how you transition. All right, Pakistan is the 5th most populous. I don't know why I'm telling you guys all of this. You know about all of this. But this you may not know. It is the 8th highest global climate risk index by the German Watch, primarily due to water shortages for agriculture and hydropower. So even though you say you have hydro capability, if the world gets too warm, then you may have some issues with having water. Okay, there's drought in a lot of different countries. And I know in the US, Lake Mead was down to the lowest level. They had to cut down hydropower. Brazil had the same issue this year or last year. So signs are there. There's things happening. Okay, Pakistan is a net food exporter. So climate change threatens the food security. And that's kind of tied to the 8th highest risk index. Flooding and at expected greater frequency. I did not know this. Jacobabad reached record high wet bulb temperature. I think this was last year. 35 degrees C is the limit for human body. Okay, so temperatures are already getting there. Okay, but you know this is one-off. But as you say, global warming, you look at anomalies, but you will see some of these, spikes different places. Okay, Pakistan's emissions are low compared to the global averages, well below the global average. All right, this is as most. These are my comments. Okay, I think most of them are. So take it for what it's worth. As most of the coal-fired plants are new and on indigenous coal, they'll most likely operate. In the IEA's report, they said 25 to 30 years. That is what they have modeled. Potential exists that the gas and oil markets will be turbulent, which I basically said was a lot of people are looking at gas as a transition fuel. So the markets you got to watch for, okay? With shortage of natural gas in Pakistan, electrification makes sense to me. If you have enough with solar, wind, biomass, and even if you have pump storage, okay? Got a lot of solar you can put in Balochistan and by the sea, and you can have pump storage. That's, to me, it's a great opportunity. Also, Pakistan could work on hydrogen. You know, if you can electrolyzers using renewables and maybe hydrogen exporter. So takes a lot of money, takes a lot of planning, but that's an opportunity. So anybody who's in the energy business in Pakistan can look into that and explore. Okay, in any case, there is work to get to this. There's reforms required in the transmission and distribution systems in Pakistan and literally around the world to what we're trying to do. All right, this slide basically shows the hottest years on record globally since 1880. The top highest ones are listed right there: 2016, 2019, 2015, 2017, 2018, all in our lifetime. Something to think about. Average temperature of human body is 37 degrees. 1 degree rise would be 38, and that is classified as fever. So Earth is there. Take it down to 1.5, it's 1.1, or sorry, 38.5. You really have a fever. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'll open it up for questions. Sorry it took a bit longer.
Thank you, Nazoor sir. It was indeed a good learning and awareness session on the climate. So now move to the next and the last part, which is the question and answer session, for which I again request Nazoor sir to answer. And I will try to take as many questions as time permit from the audience. But obviously, if you still feel your question is unanswered, please write me and I will get back to you fully with an answer. So my email address is there. You can reach me at any time. So we have a couple of questions here. Let me. Yes, yes, Tahir sir. Would you like to say something?
Everybody else? It's good to see you. And so many old acquaintances. It's really great to see all of you. One of the things which is really challenging in this whole game is the collaborative environment which is required between various nations, and the state we are in right now, in terms of bipolar world, it is going to become a big challenge. So, I mean, you're coming from US and you're looking at it. Well, what is the thought process as to how, I mean, there is technical breakthroughs are there, technical knowledge is there. How to go about it is becoming more and more clear. But the big question mark in my mind is the will of the governments to really go down this route. Thanks.
Yeah, TJ, absolutely. Your point is well taken. Okay, so I'll give you an example. And the example is that I'm taking is of the pandemic. Pandemic did not see any boundaries. Neither does global warming. Whatever anybody does is going to impact everybody around the world. So having said that, I think a lot of the governments are looking at this to kind of say, okay, what do we do? So there is IEA, okay, International Energy Agency, and I think he's the executive director. He has been going to, and his name escapes me, Patabiro, I think that's his name. He has been going from country to country and talking to people and trying to corral and get everybody together. It's a tough job. I mean, I don't know if he needs to do that, but he feels that he needs to do that. So he's trying his best. But your point is, will everybody come together? And I hope they do, because I think there is no choice, but things need to happen. Farooq?
Okay, let's go to some other question. Dr. Oneeb is asking, prior to COP26, there were financial pledges by the developed world which were not honored. What guarantee do we have on the financial pledges going forward?
Yeah, because this Oneeb, very good. You read my paper, which is all right. I'm glad you brought that up.
Not yet, Nazoor Saab. I think I'll become more wiser after reading that.
Okay. But you are absolutely right. In Paris, there was a commitment made by the developing economies that they would put in $100 billion a year until 2020 or 2022 for developing nations and trying to for actually going to renewable energy or impact of climate change, fund. That did not happen. So that issue did come up in COP26. But I think what was done here is the finance piece that I said they have put a person in charge that in a lot of the financial institutions are committing to provide that, I don't know how many trillions of dollars that I had mentioned. So the hope is that all of that will work and support the developing economies or emerging economies. So you're absolutely correct, that did not happen. But they're pushing to make this thing happen now.
I think, going forward, I think it's not only the pledging and disbursement of funds. I think there has to be some kind of framework in place whereby some criteria has to be there to what kind of funding and what kind of criteria will there be to allocate funds. Either these funds are going to go to India, China, Pakistan, or elsewhere. I think there has to be some kind of, I'm sure there must be some kind of criteria there.
Yeah, this actually was announced in November, right, at the end of the COP26. And they have also announced a person named who's the lead. So the $130 trillion through various institutions, financial institutions, are committed. Okay, so what does that mean? I don't know, but that's something that we need to look at.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Isla wants to say something. Isla, go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Jay. It's a pleasure seeing you all. So happy. And I think everybody doing well. But I have one point to this. Like we will talk about that. There's a lot of investment that is going to actually be coming for this development and net zero. But what we are talking about is how it's not actually a non-profit investment that's going to come. So we need to we'll be passing this on to the consumers. So how we're going to take care of that? So, there's utility bills and this load is already on the people, and it's increasing. So how are we going to go to and pass this on and take care of this? That the poverty level of people is already, a lot of the proportion is already down this time, and we are going to, again, sustain with this. People don't have food and basic needs. We should be investing this much on this. Is that on priority? That's my point.
Hey, very good question, Islam. I think I don't have the answers because I don't have that money. No, but I think the answer, the way I want to answer to you is this: what is in the NDC for Pakistan. They have asked for that money, and rightfully so. That they can make some changes. They can go to 60% renewable and so on. But all of that takes money. So if the money does come, how does that get translated to what the utility bills might be? That's number one. Second part of it is, what are you doing with the infrastructure, your distribution systems and so on, to get that to everybody? So this is, at the local level, these conversations need to take place to keep everybody honest that, okay, if you're asking for this money and you do get it, does it reflect in people's lives? Okay, so any government or top, agencies can't really do that. This is why, I believe all of this is going to impact everybody's life. And if if you're going down this path, then you got to be fair that everything that you do impacts people at the grassroots level. Okay, not just people on the top. I think TJ has got a question hand up.
Nazoor, I would like you to comment on, because we are all engineers and there are people who are in different level of careers. It is going to have a huge impact on how the jobs would look like coming forward. So maybe some kind of insight into it. How should people be looking at future opportunities? And there are a few things we can't fix, which we have talked about up till now. But a few things we can fix is what do we do with our careers. So maybe some comment on how should we be looking at careers in next 5 to 10 years, or maybe earlier than that?
Yeah, TJ, I gave it a little bit of a thought, not too much, okay? And I'll tell you why. And as you had said, that we're at different levels in our careers. Some of us have retired. So I was looking at all of this as to what is going to happen with the energy sector, okay, around the world. And what does it mean to people's jobs and careers and so on and so forth. When you look at going to electrification, the jobs in the renewable area, distribution area, all the way down to at the home level, there's going to be a lot of activity. Okay, no questions about it. When we talk about looking at hydrogen, that's a brand new area. But if you're looking at green hydrogen, which is from renewable, and splitting water to get hydrogen, electrolysis. So people have to look at these kind of things. Says, okay, where can I fit into that? The other part of it is the nuclear industry is picking up again. Okay, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is one of the largest utilities, just announced that they're looking at small modular nuclear reactors. So they're looking into those kind of programs. So one of the things that people will have to look at environmentally, what's going on, what are the what direction is the world going or their country going in the region that they're in. How can they plug themselves in? What does that career look like? So everything doesn't just disappear. Okay, I even kind of look at it as, okay, if you have a mechanic who's doing, there's a lot of mechanic shops in Pakistan and different places, and they are really fixing and tuning and motorcycles and cars and so on. You go to all electric. You need to educate these people as to how this new vehicle is going to work and what is their livelihood going to look like. So the transition even takes not only for an educated degree person, is also for the people who are out on the street doing this work, is to how do I move them to a different level? Otherwise they're out of a job and their livelihood is gone. So, and it could happen pretty fast, okay, in the next 8 to 10 years. So that was a long answer. The short answer is we got to keep an eye on what the changes are, what's going to happen in your neighborhood or your locality, your country, and adjust to it.
Or can we have just one last question?
Okay, yeah, sure. Yes, Ibrahim Makbul is asking, do we or international bodies have any plan for reversing the game? I mean, converting CO2 into any environment-friendly product.
Oh, yeah, I think I'll tell you, if you look at the IPCC report, by the way, that's about 600 pages, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I read it all, okay? I have not. So if you look at it, they have some thoughts as to what can be done. But there are about 200 projects that are on paper, out of which I think close to 50 or 60, and my numbers could be off, that carbon capture and sequestration is in progress. Okay, they're actually operating. They're even up to the point of pulling carbon from the atmosphere. Okay, so they're going carbon negative. Okay, from the atmosphere. So some of that effort is going on. There is also effort going on that you could actually pump some of the CO2 in certain types of rock formations under the sea. Okay, so they react with the rocks that are there and so on. But part of the concern also comes up is when you have too much carbon in the water, that's carbonic acid. Okay, and that is what starts to bleach and kill a lot of the coral. So there's a lot of different issues. There are experts in this area. They have a lot of talks. All of them are also available on YouTube. So I spend a lot of time learning all this stuff. So please don't take my answer to say, yep, that's it. You guys need to do a little more research and deep dive. Go ahead.
With the permission, sorry, Vanessa, go ahead, please.
Okay. No. You want one last question?
Yeah, with your permission, because the session was on live on the YouTube. So one question we can take from there, like Haq Minas is asking, how will the predictions look like if there is a catastrophic eruption? And what is the contribution of uncontrollable events such as forest fires, methane hydrates, volcanic eruptions?
Yeah, very good question, because I think that there is, the issue has to do with when you have a lot of fires, like there was in Australia, in the US, and if you have volcanic eruptions and so on, there is a lot of CO2 that is erupted, okay? Especially when you look at the fires, because of the combustion and so on, there's a lot of CO2 in the air. Yes, it eats away from budget, carbon budget that's there, and it does impact. And these are some of this plus, I'm going to go in a different direction also. There are reports, and the scientists have basically looked at this. As you get into the global warming and you have ice melts or glacier melts and so on, a lot of the permafrost is getting uncovered, and that has a lot of methane emissions from that. And it just gets into a positive feedback, which really makes things worse. The positive here is not good. Positive is just making things hotter. So a lot of this is being looked at by the scientists, and by no means I can explain everything to you, but there is information available on not only YouTube, but a lot of these reports have that as to the effects of some of these fires, what happened, and how much emissions was there. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Nazoor sir. In the end, I'd like to thank you everyone for the participation and making this event very successful. And you can see this lecture on the YouTube. The link is there. So later on, you can see on the YouTube. And please fill the feedback form, which is pasted in this chat. So goodbye. I'm signing off.
Yeah. Let me, Farooq, just a word of thanks from Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I think the subject is vast, and the time allocated, I think hour and a half. I think people will agree that it's not sufficient, and I confirm it to you that Nazoor has 2 to 5 hours a day for number of weeks of research. So I think he's still that's what he says, he's still learning. And what you have actually passed on, I think it was great valuable information, and we thank you very much for sparing your time. As Farooq said, this presentation will be available. We'll post this presentation so that people will have time to look through it, absorb it, and if they have any question, they can either directly send it to Nazoor or Farooq or myself.
Yeah, can I just say a couple of words? I want everybody to know, and there are good questions, and if you have questions, I think, I know life is busy. I think everybody needs to do a little bit of their own research to understand the subject. Okay, it's huge. It is huge, and I am speaking from an energy professional perspective. Okay, I'm not a scientist. I don't have all of the data, but I do believe in some of these sites that are there. Links, obviously, you can find reputable sites. You've got to look at them, and you'll learn as the time goes on. But that's part of our responsibility to do that and educate others. So, with that in mind, I'm just sharing what my interpretation is of the data that I saw. But there are much smarter people in the world than me. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.